All right, we'll start in about a minute. Let me turn the attendance. The attendance is already running. All right, so please, we'll start in about a minute. All right. All right. Thank you very much. I am grateful you're all here. We had our makeup class on Friday. About a third of you were here, meaning a third of you were not here. I said on Friday that if you're able to watch the video before class today, I would excuse the absence. So if you already watched it, please email me. If you didn't, you should watch it anyway, but I'm not going to excuse the absence. Questions before we get started? Is there a hand up? I don't see a hand. Nope. All right. I heard a click. We're going to. It was on YouTube since last week, so I don't have any control over the streaming server. In fact, I don't ever actually look at it. I think it's complicated and the video quality sucks. So just use YouTube. So it's been on YouTube for 5 days, or 4 days if I can count. But you should watch it in any event when you can. Yeah, Gavin.
Wait, so I have a question on that. Did you send out an email about us needing to watch it? I didn't realize the Friday was assigned because I had like a competition and I just couldn't show up.
I said in class.
Okay.
And it's on the syllabus. Yep.
Okay, understood.
Yep, and I said anyway. And in any event, if you weren't able to access it, you should have emailed me, in which case I've told you to check YouTube, as a couple of you did. So yeah, when you miss class, make sure you know what happened. I understand people have tournaments and stuff, but we have makeups. All right. In our last class, we discussed this concept of the freedom of association. Now, the freedom of association isn't actually in the First Amendment, right? It says nothing about it. And we tried to trace the roots of this right. And the best we can come up with is that this is some sort of substantive due process right. That is, the due process clause protects the rights of life, liberty, and property. And what does liberty mean? Well, the court makes stuff up as it goes along. And one of these forms of liberty they protected was a right of association. And the Alabama case, which we read, was really a precursor to Griswold. And in fact, Griswold cited NAACP versus Alabama. Of course, Griswold was the privacy case from Connecticut that I'm certain you cited in common law with me or with anybody else. Okay? So we have this idea of this right of association, which again isn't actually in the Constitution, but it's a sort of this penumbral right that's somewhat connected to the freedom of speech. Now, that's the point I want to focus on today, right? What is the connection between those you associate with and what words you're associated with? In other words, if you're required to associate with some people, does that affect the message that you convey? So I want to start the question. It's going to sound provocative, but it has a purpose. Who's next?
I was going to jump in.
Okay, Ryan, you're not alphabetically next, but you're throwing yourself to the wolves because of some
mistake last time. Yeah,
I think there was a mistake last time. Okay, well then, whoever's actually next, you're not. I'm not up to the B's, but I know I'm somewhere else. But just whoever's next, just be ready. So, Ryan, let me ask you a question, please. We know from Loving versus Virginia that the state cannot prohibit interracial marriage, right? That's a case that's 50 years old. It's pretty well established, right? The state can't ban interracial marriage. What if an individual person, though, says, you know what? I want to marry the same person. I want to marry the person of the same race. So let's say a black person says, I will only marry a black person, or a white person says, I will only marry a white person. I do not want to raise my child in a mixed race household. That was actually my exam question a couple of years ago. Could the state pass a law that makes that decision illegal? Imagine you apply for a marriage license and it says, are you married? Would you be willing to marry a person of the opposite race? And that's one of the questions. And the person says, no, I will not. Would that law, that question be valid? Could you ask that question and maybe deny a license if they refuse to answer the question?
I don't think so. Based on line of reasoning that goes through our cases that we read for today, it seems like there's an understood liberty that a person in their family unit, in the close, the people that they want to be intimately associated with, they get to choose that and make that selection based on any criteria or none at all that they choose.
Okay. Now let me throw you a harder question, which was my exam a couple years ago. Adoption. Let's say parents do not want to adopt a biracial child. That is, white parents will only want to adopt a white child, and black parents only want to adopt a black child. Could the state pass a law prohibiting that? In other words, we can do this maybe one or two ways. One, you can't request the race of your child at all when you put in for an adoption. That is blind. You don't know what you're going to get. Or number two, by law, you're required to give a black child to a white parent to create integration. Think of it. That was my exam about 2 years ago for con law. Would that sort of law be valid?
Again, I don't think so, because I don't think that the interests of the state, I don't think are served by creating families that don't want to exist.
They don't want to be together. Okay.
So I don't think they have a legitimate interest in creating unfriendly households, for the kids or among the parents or whoever.
So if they don't want to be together, the state should enforce them to be together. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I don't think that is going to accomplish whatever interest the state might be defending.
All right. Smiha, your hand's up?
Yes, I was just going to make a comment based on that. I think the other thing when it comes to adoption and mixed race is that, and, we're talking about First Amendment and it's just people have different experiences. And I think that forcing individuals to adopt a certain type of child, not understanding what their background is or the challenges that come, can also be a big issue. You don't want to force a white family to take on the responsibility of adopting a black child if they're not able to provide that care just based on what the law is saying.
Okay. All right. Who's next on the list? Who's next? Thank you, Smiha. The very good answer or comment. Who's next? Someone's got to be next. No one's next. I start at the top. All right, you guys. Sucks for the people. Yes.
Montana Cortez went last.
Montana Cortez went last. Okay. So who's after Montana Cortez?
Wait, no, we were in the D. Sorry.
Okay. So Heather, are you next? Heather?
I have no idea.
Sure, I'll call on you then.
Okay.
Heather, so let me change the hypo. We're no longer dealing with a with a business. I'm sorry, we're not dealing with a family, now we have a business. Let's say you have a partnership with two businesses, right? Let's say it's a law firm. And let's say that there are two businesses, two partners in the law firm. Could a business partners decide that I work so closely with only one other people, only two people at the entire firm, that I want to pick who is my partner, and I don't want to have a partner who's a woman. I only want a male partner because maybe a guy might be attracted to the woman and, things happen. What if you have a two-person shop? Would that sort of association be permissible?
Sorry, my dog is
That's okay. That's okay. Would a two-person shop be permissible to say, I only want a female partner, only want a male partner in a partnership?
I mean, I think in smaller situations like that, it might be a little bit harder to like force somebody to work with somebody that like they don't.
Why? Why does the size of the business matter, Heather?
Because it's a lot more of like an intimate relationship between those two people.
Intimate relationship. All right, let me change the hypo. Let's say there are 5 employees at the firm. Could they still say, I only want to have female partners, only male partners at the firm?
I mean, I think it's a little bit harder in that.
10 people, a 10-person firm.
I mean, I would say probably not.
20 people.
I don't think so.
100 people. Any interest at all?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Heather. So you see what we're doing here, right? I started with the most basic, intimate, to use the word that Heather used, most intimate bond, which would be a married couple, right? And I think even Justice Brennan would acknowledge that the state could not interfere with who you choose to marry. And that there's the Obergefell line of cases, which is not what I'm talking about, but who you choose to frequent with is a very personal choice. And I think adoption, for the reasons Mikan otherwise mentioned, your kids are very personal, right? And what kind of kid you want to bring up in this world is a very hard decision to take from a new parent, right? There's a lot of things you have to think about, which you didn't even know you had to think about, right? So there's very good reasons why you may not want to force parents to bring in certain types of kids into this world. And then we have like a small business. Imagine a 2-person partnership where you work only with this other person. And, maybe you're willing to permit some form of discrimination for a small partnership. But as you go, 2 employees, 5 employees, 10 employees, 100, I give this to Heather, the interest of the state becomes less. You may not know this, but in most states, discrimination laws don't apply to small businesses. The threshold varies by state. Sometimes it's 10 employees, sometimes it's 20 employees, sometimes it's 5 employees. Sometimes it's 1 employee, right? In some states, it doesn't matter how large of a shop you are. But in some states, they recognize that very small businesses are not subject to the usual anti-discrimination laws. Yeah, Krista says Title 7 is 15. Yeah, it varies by state. The state laws do vary across the map. Some states, it's 0. If you have I guess with a sole proprietor, you can't really discriminate. But, if you have 2 people, you can. Who's next? Lauren, you here?
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Hello. So, Lauren, let me change the hypo. We haven't done the freedom of religion yet, but imagine you have a religion that decides to exclude women from certain services, which many religions do, right? They perhaps only let men perform certain rituals. Could and let's say it's a house of worship with 100 members, right? This is not like a small, this is a huge house, 500 members, 1,000 members, right? Second Baptist, these huge mega churches, right? Could the state pass some law that requires houses of worship to admit men and women alike into, whatever rituals they have?
So I guess under the test that the majority used in the Roberts case, yes, because the factors they used were more based on size. So if you're talking about a larger population of people, then the state could not allow discrimination of women. But if you looked at the test that the majority used, which was talking about whether the inclusion or exclusion of a certain group of people would prohibit the idea of the group.
So how would admitting women to these various religious rituals affect the idea of the group?
Well, for me, it wouldn't, but I suppose the religious group could argue that it somehow are prohibited, I don't know, or restricted their beliefs in some way.
What about, Lauren, let's just change the hypo. Let's say instead of you have a house of worship that excludes women, let's say you have a house of worship that only admits people of a certain race. They won't admit Black people, for example. And indeed, there were such houses of worship in American history. I'm not making this up. Would that change the hypo at all?
Well, so I believe it was in this case that they talked about there are certain limitations, and one of them was you can't discriminate based on race.
So could the state force a evangelical church to admit a black member they don't want to admit?
Yes.
I think the answer is not, but we haven't done First Amendment yet, free exercise yet, but I think you're on the right track. Let me just take a step back and explain why I'm doing this sort of introduction. There are two interests that are in tension in this topic. The first interest is the state's interest to eliminate various forms of discrimination, whether it's based on sex or race or whatever else you have, right? Or sexual orientation, like in the Dale case, right? So the first interest is the state wants to eliminate various forms of discrimination. And you studied in con law cases like Katzenbeck, New Klung, and Ollie's Barbecue, where if you run a restaurant or hotel, the state or the federal government can require you to admit people without regard to race. Your common carriers, right? All right, so the first interest is you are eliminating or doing the best you can to eradicate discrimination. Okay. The other interest is this right of association. And the court recognizes, I think in both of these cases, that when you require a group to admit someone, you potentially change the message, right? So let's say you have a group, let's call it the Christian Legal Society. And let's say that the state requires them to admit atheists to the group. And let's say a lot of atheists join the group and they run for office, and an atheist becomes the president. And the atheist decides to change the Christian Legal Society to an atheist group. It changes the charter and they vote for it. Well, then what are the Christians going to do? Now they're an atheist group. Now, this is actually a case, it's in your supplement, which I haven't assigned, called Christian Legal Society versus Martinez. Right? I'm simplifying the facts a little bit. But when you admit people to a group, you run the risk they change the message, right? People with different interests might want to push a group in a different direction. So I'll use the easy example. In the Jaycees case, this was a group that didn't let women perform certain functions in the group. Presumably, admitting women would put pressure on the group to start letting women do those functions, right? That's generally what happens, right? When you let someone into the group, you want to bring them in. In the Boy Scout case, the Boy Scouts at the time no longer had a policy that didn't permit gay Scoutmasters. Now they do. They don't care anymore. Now they're the Boy Scouts had to sell a bunch of Norman Rockwell paintings to pay all their debts for child abuse because of this. The group's in a very different place than it was 20 years ago. But at the time, they were afraid that they had a policy saying we don't admit gay members, and if they admitted gay members, it would undermine their policy. Right? How can they have a policy which they themselves are not following? So you have these two sort of interests that are in tension. You have this interest of eradicating various forms of discrimination, and you have the second interest to ensure that the group is able to articulate their message as they wish without being diluted by the state. All right. Jessica, go ahead.
So my question is, it seems sort of subversive for people to join the atheist group in particular, obviously, but even in this case, like I never really want to go places I'm not wanted for the most part. I understand desegregating hotels and restaurants and public places. I don't really understand infiltrating like a private organization and trying to force them to change their policies. That just seems really strange to me.
So I think your question is, why would I join something that doesn't want me? Right?
And and why would the state ever think that was? Because it's insidious. Like I don't really know exactly what's going on, but there's something weird to me.
Insidious, like Agatha?
I don't know that is.
Yeah, sorry, WandaVision reference. All right. Well, look, it's Brennan all along, as they say.
It's just, I guess that's like these test cases, right? Like, is the purpose of this to just force the point that you have to?
Yeah, if you watch WandaVision, that was actually a very good joke.
I don't watch anything.
It's fine. It really was Brennan all along. Everything. It's little magic. All right. So let me answer the question this way. So one, there are testers. So you mentioned testers. What's a tester? Very often, groups would deliberately go somewhere where they knew they were unwelcome in order to sue. So for example, let's say a landlord that would not rent an apartment to a black person. They would deliberately send a black person there with good references, with good credit, with all the paperwork filled out, and say, sorry, we won't rent you the apartment. And then 5 minutes later, they send a white person with the exact same paperwork, the exact same references, and they give them the apartment, right? And then they bring a lawsuit under various civil rights laws. That's been around forever, right? We know this. Homer Plessy, right, deliberately boarded a white train car to set up Plessy against Ferguson. So the idea of testing is going on forever. But I think your question is a little bit different, right? Why would people want to join a group with perhaps the intent of changing the message of the group?
Yeah, it's really.
Anyone want to answer that? I have an answer, but maybe my answer is not good enough. It's actually a really I give this question a lot of thought, and I'll address. Anyone want to jump in? Answer Jessica's question? Anyone else? Okay, I got Smiha and Krista. Let's see, what do you got?
I was gonna say, I think the reason why a lot of people want to join these organizations is because the reason why they're not allowing people in doesn't serve a proper purpose. It is more discriminatory.
Hold on. What do you mean proper purpose?
Like the reasoning behind it, I guess, has roots in racial or gender inequality.
So the way then to change the group's policy is to sue them for admission.
Yes, if they're not going to let you in, then your only other recourse is.
So if you don't like what the organization says, you have to use a law to force them to change their view.
I'm not asking them to change their view. I'm just saying that them not wanting to admit women for a certain reason that doesn't serve, that has a reason. I guess it's hard for me to explain. The reason why they're not admitting women or men or having them in, positions of power, the true reason behind it is rooted in a source of oppression, doesn't necessarily,
But if this is an oppressive group, why can't they just oppress among themselves? Why do you have to change an oppressive group?
Because they're oppressive.
But so what? No one's forcing them to go anywhere. They're not government. They can't oppress you. Why can't you have a private oppressive group?
I mean, I guess just morally, I wouldn't want that to happen. We all have our own ideas and morals of what we think is right, and I just don't think having an oppressive.
So people can't have bad ideas and oppressive ideas?
They can have bad ideas, but not when their bad ideas are being used to oppress people.
No, but they're not. They're a private group. They're not going anywhere. They're just holding
They're not
meetings.
oppressing each other, right? They're not oppressing.
Jessica, sorry, we got to do one at a time. We can't do crosstalk, especially on Zoom, right? But I mean, it's to me, you're raising a really good point. I'll take the most odious one, the Ku Klux Klan, right? Should they just not be allowed to exist?
No, they can exist, but they also. I feel like this is a loaded question.
It is. It is. It's an absolutely loaded question. You walked right into it.
I know I did.
I know you did.
I know.
Okay, hold on. Let's try again. Next up in the queue is Joe. I think you're on mute, sir.
The example I was going to use. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, maybe the example I was going to use maybe might not work for this, because I was thinking in terms of Augusta National.
Yep.
Or the country clubs, or even here locally, like Houston Country Club, where it's still to this day there's no members of color. Like, you've got to be pretty intentional about excluding some of the membership. And I think from a person that wants to join, you want access. Maybe this country club is around the corner from your house, or maybe you saw the Masters every year as a kid and you pertained to certain financial status in life, you can afford to join, but there's an intent to keep you out. So I think maybe because you want to be a member of the club.
Yeah, just if people don't know, the Augusta National, the golf club, was in Georgia, I think, where they hold it was a huge golf tournament called the Masters, and for the longest time they would not admit women to the club. That changed around 10 years ago, I think, if memory serves. But a good point, Joe. I have Reed, then Ryan, and then Christina on the queue.
Yeah, Professor, I just had some comments. So the idea that subverting a group to destroy, to silence their viewpoint is kind of, the whole point of the First Amendment is to have differing viewpoints. So I think the proper course of action, if you want to defeat a group's ideas, is to form your own group that proclaims your ideas in a louder and better fashion, and you make the other group irrelevant over time because your ideas are better, and instead of infiltrating them and destroying them. I mean, that's just what.
Yeah, I mean, let me take up Samiha's point, and let me just play devil's advocate for a minute. I mean, you wouldn't say you're trying to infiltrate and destroy. You would say that it's a good organization with some bad features, and you want to improve the organization, right? You want to, maybe 95% of what they do is fine, but then 5% is pretty bad. And I think any member of organization can, have a vote in a meeting and can say, I want to do this or that. Why can't someone join a group to try to improve it? You like what they do good charity work, that's fine. The Boy Scouts, they go camping, all these nice things, but some things they do are wrong.
So to use the WandaVision reference, so like a ship of Theseus thing, the ship ceases to be the same ship over time. If you so 5% of the group is bad, right? And so you can change the 5%, so 95% of the group's still the original group. But if you're chiseling away at the marble, it ceases to become it's fundamentally a different thing if you keep whittling away at it, essentially.
All right. So okay, good. Thanks, Reed. I got Ryan, Christina, and Nancy. Then I want to move on. Go ahead.
Sure. I think to piggyback on what Joe was saying, a lot of the times we're talking about access. We're talking about the framework of the organization providing support, and it goes with what you were saying about you like some of the features. You like that the Jaycees provide opportunities for young professionals to network and to build relationships in the business community as they mature, but you don't like the fact that it's only men who get to vote on what they do. So
do you think Ryan, you think suddenly admitting women to this group would give women access to all the privileges, or will the male members just kind of shun them out and keep them to the side?
Well, I guess it would depend on how many women joined the group and what sort of voting power they wielded. And then the other thing too is, if it's so important to you that you have that framework, but you also have the male only, there's also the freedom to start your own group.
Yeah, so, but that new group will be subject to the same sort of discrimination laws. You form the He-Man Women Haters Club from Little Rascals, right? You have the same anti-discrimination laws. Sorry.
That is true. You would have the same discrimination laws, but if it was important to you to forward, your opinions on that, you can either form a smaller group that's under the level that is subject to those, or you can, lobby for your government and, to repeal those acts.
Good luck with that. Yeah, I got to move on, Ryan. Christina's been patient waiting. Yes, go ahead, Christina.
Just really quick. So Jessica's question was, why would you want to join this group where you're not wanted? But I think it's especially important to recognize, especially in the Boy Scouts case, that his desire to be in this position wasn't hinged on his sexual orientation. That I could take from the case.
I don't. What do you mean hinge? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean by hinge.
Like, his basis for wanting that position had nothing to do for his exclusion in it. So why would you want to be somewhere where you're not?
That depends on what you find the motivation. If the Boy Scouts have a policy that says homosexuality is immoral, then it would hinge. Then he'd be an openly gay person that would go against the values of the group. So I think it's pretty central.
Well, yes, it is essential, but I guess more what I'm meaning is when just Boy Scouts in general, when he was applying for that position and going through all of his experience, it wasn't because he was homosexual, it was because he wanted to be a part of this organization.
Right, but one of the central values of this wasn't to oppose homosexuality. That was one of their tenets, and as openly gay person, he couldn't do that. Right. In other words, the problem perversely wasn't that he was gay; that he was openly gay, as the case reveals. Once he was openly gay and made a statement about that, which was a huge deal back in the early 2000s, he was then in tension with the policies of the group. Yeah, Nancy, your hand keeps going up and down. I don't know if you want to speak or not. I want to make sure if I Your hand was up a long time ago and then went down and up and again.
No, I think we've gone on long enough.
Okay.
I'll save it.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the thing. Well, look, I think we just drilled down the entire case. And let me give you another preview. We'll do a case later this semester involving bake shops, right? There are a certain number of bakeries, and this is a small number. I mean, you can probably count them on two hands, that will not provide cakes for same-sex weddings. I mean, we're talking a very small number of bakeries, right? These are mostly small bakeries. One of them was a Masterpiece Cake Shop in Denver, Colorado. I drove past it once. I mean, it's in a strip mall. You'd miss it. It's a small shop. I think less than 5 people work there, right? Their place are known that they will not make cakes for gay weddings. That's their policy. To paraphrase Jessica's question, why would you go there knowing they're not going to make you a cake? And to this day, gay, transgender people go there to tee up lawsuits. That's why they do it. There are a million bake shops that will make the cake. Go down the street, go to Kroger, anywhere else they'll make you the cake. There are a million bakers that'll do it. But why go after that one? And perhaps the answer is a test case. You want to establish a point. You want to make it impossible for anyone to deny service to anyone. There are a lot of reasons, but you do see this concept in law quite a bit where people deliberately seek to obtain a service they know they're not going to get, and they use that as a means for litigation. And there are lots of reasons why, but this is a very common phenomenon. All right. All right, good. Let me try to synthesize both of these cases because they're somewhat in tension, right? You have Roberts versus Jaycees it's 1984, perfect year. I didn't even think about it. But yeah, it's 1984. Speaking of wrong think, right? And you have Boy Scouts v. Dale in 2000. Background, right? In 1984, Justice Brennan was still in the court, and the court was, moderate left, right? By the time you get to 2000, you have a solid 5-member conservative majority most of the time. This was before Lawrence v. Texas, right? Lawrence was 2003. This is Dale, so 3 years earlier. So it was still the law that you could basically criminalize gay sex. That was still the law under Bowers v. Hardwick. You had Romer v. Evans, which was this weird case about the Colorado Amendment process, which I don't want to go into, but you still had this sort of movement towards equal rights for gays and lesbians. It hadn't quite gotten there yet because Justice Kennedy didn't think it was needed, but at least here in Dale, Kennedy was willing to go along with the conservatives. All right, so you have these two cases. In Jaycees, you had this conflict between the state's human rights law, which wanted to eliminate gender-based discrimination, and on the other side, you have the state's interest in freedom of association, that they want to decide who their members are. Justice Brennan comes up with this, convoluted test that is very intricate, and frankly, I don't think it even matters anymore. I mean, it is what it is. This test is what Brennan gave, but I don't think the Rehnquist court gave it much attention. I think they kind of just moved past it because it was Brennan, and it was Brennan, right? Whatever it was. It was for this case and not much more than that. But the gist of the Brennan opinion is that organizations do have this interest in defining their message. The states also have an interest in eradicating discrimination of various kinds. Where do you draw the line then? Size apparently is the line. For the smallest groups, marriage, childbirth, raising children, cohabiting relatives, right? This is a very personal decision in which the state could not intercede, which is why I think the adoption hypo I gave earlier would not be valid under the court's precedents, right? I think I had a couple years ago, my exam question was you were required to adopt a person of the opposite race to help build integration and basically break down white neighborhoods. That was the fact pattern, right? But I think under the line of cases in Jaycees, that would not be permitted. So smaller organizations may have a presumptive right, but as the organization gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the state's interest decreases. And Brennan has this test. We have a spectrum from the most intimate to the most attenuated of personal attachments. We look at, 7 factors: size, purpose, policy, selectivity, congeniality, and other characteristics that may be pertinent. What a worthless test. And other characteristics may be pertinent. It doesn't matter at this point, right? It's whatever you want it to mean. It's like a Rorschach test, right? I'm sorry, I get angry with Brendan, right? It's a test that's absolutely meaningless. It doesn't mean anything, right? It can be applied in any way conceivable that's useful to a case. So, yeah, I know torts, you have a 7-factor balancing test. It's not a balancing test at that point. It's just open-ended. It's whatever you want it to be, right? You look at a splotch of paint. It's, oh, I see it, right? It's a penumbra. But that's the test. If you want to go apply that in an exam, good luck. I have no idea how you would apply that. It's not meant to be applied in any sort of rigorous fashion. But here you have the Jaycees. They have a couple of 400 members. They admit just about everyone. There were some Jaycee chapters that actually admitted women. Brennan says that this chapter lacks the distinctive characteristics that might afford constitutional protection to the decision of its members to exclude women. So in other words, there's nothing special about the Jaycees as an organization that would allow it to exclude women. If this was a house of worship, I think there are some good reasons why certain religious rituals may not be useful or may not be permissible to be performed by women. But Brennan's saying this is a big organization. They're not in that space. Still, the court says you have a freedom not to associate, right? It's kind of a weird thought, right? You have freedom to association, which means you don't associate, right? The right to choose who you're with also includes the right to choose who you're not with. Or maybe to state it a little bit differently, I teach property. The most essential stick in the bundle is the right to exclude. I see people nodding. They remember property. Good. Right? I mean, it's not just a property concept. Just the most essential aspect of defining who you are and what you own is keeping people out. It's a gruesome, awesome, awful thought, but it's true. Right? I get to decide who I have dinner with. Right? I get to decide who I marry, who I have children with, who my children. I actually don't get to pick my kids, but you get the idea. Right? But here, the specific characteristics of the Jaycees suggest that they can have this policy. The court also says that the Minnesota non-discrimination law is not designed to suppress speech. Right? This is a generally applicable law, and they treat the Jaycees as a place of public accommodation. I'm not sure if that's right. I think that expands public accommodation way too broadly. I really do. This is by definition a group not open to the public. This is not like a hotel or a restaurant that's designed to be open to the public. This is not a monopoly. You don't need it, right? There's no reason to give the Jaycees monopoly. But the court seems to accept the fact that the the Jaycees, this group, is basically a public accommodation. The court also discusses statistics and generalizations. And if you remember the case Craig v. Boren from common law, this is whether the state could have one drinking age for men and another drinking age for women. And the state said, well, women are more mature and boys are more reckless. And actually it was a Brennan opinion. Brennan said, no, you can't make those generalizations, right? We can't stereotype and assume that women are one way and men are another. And what the court says here is that the Jaycees are making generalizations, what you might call a stereotype, that women hold one type of views and men hold another. In other words, they're presuming that if women are in the group, they will only advance a certain type of position that's contrary to theirs. I suppose it's possible that the women will be admitted and they'll make no changes. They'll have the exact same policies. Now, I don't believe that for a second, right? The reason why these women were suing was to change the policy by admitting women. So the theory can work, but I think you have this this sort of Brennan sleight of hand where he's ignoring what they're trying to, which is change the organization's policy. Okay. All right. Questions on the Jaycees case? Yeah, I don't know. I always say this whenever I deal with the Brennan opinion. I don't know if it had any vitality and he retired. It seems like just such an open-ended test that is so. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. That I don't know how much juice it has. So I think the Dale case would be a better representation where the law is today. I don't know how much teeth the Jaycees case has. In fact, I mentioned the Christian Legal Society case today. I don't think that comes out the same way today without Kennedy in the court. I think it comes out the other way. I think the Christian Legal Society wins that case. All right. Questions on Jaycees? All right. The Dale case, I think, is a little bit different. And I think Christina was getting at it before. Here, you had a member of the organization who was in it for many years, right? He went all the way through Eagle Scout rank, the top rank they have, and he had performed admirably. But at some point, they learned that he was openly gay. By the way, you can just see what year you're in. Rehnquist wrote he was an avowed homosexual. The court doesn't use that word anymore, homosexual. They just don't use it anymore. You can just look, go from Romer to Lawrence to Windsor to Obergefell, and just look at what words they use. They go from homosexual to gay and lesbian, and just it's a subtle semantic shift, but there's a lot going on there. But anyway, the court says he was an avowed homosexual and gay rights activist. Imagine that, right? New Jersey public accommodations law treated the Boy Scouts as if they were public accommodation. Again, I don't know if that's true. Now, this issue came up a little differently because the Boy Scouts would often use public parks and public campgrounds. And that's how a number of states got the Boy Scouts to change their policies locally, because they had to use public parks and camping grounds and the like. All right. So I guess unless you're meeting in a private basement, whispering like hushes, you're talking things, you're basically a public accommodation, which is what I think the law is today. Okay. Chief Justice Rehnquist writes the majority for 5-4 court, and he acknowledges that you have this First Amendment right to engage, First Amendment right of association. Just pause for a moment. The conservatives don't like substantive due process, but they go full hog with this one. They don't reject it, right? I suppose if you reject substantive due process, you say there is no right of association. So the Boy Scouts have no right to associate with whoever they wish, but none of the conservatives go down that road. Just food for thought, okay? Rehnquist writes that this right of association is crucial. This is Jessica's point, I think, to prevent the majority from imposing its views on groups that would rather express other unpopular ideas. And maybe this is also Samiha's comment as well, right? Must a group that has what someone calls an oppressive idea be crushed? Should they be allowed to hold those groups, right? Can the Klan be allowed to exist? Can the skinheads or the Proud Boys be allowed to exist, right? Well, sometimes these groups go on and do dangerous things. They're not just sitting in a basement talking amongst themselves, and often talk leads to violence later. Very hard questions, very hard questions. Rehnquist writes, forcing a group to accept certain members may impair the ability of the group to express those views. The freedom of association presupposes the freedom not to associate. And Rehnquist writes, the forced inclusion of unwanted person in a group infringes that group's freedom of expressive association. If the presence of that person affects in a significant way the group's ability to advocate public or private viewpoints. All right. Is the Boy Scouts an expressive association? I think this is Christina's question as well, a little bit. Dale said this is just a group of camping, right? They're not expressing any ideas. And the court shoots it down very quickly. They say, look, the Boy Scouts are seeking to instill certain values about family and the like. And one of those values is about marriage. And they reject the idea of everything gay. They just reject it, right? It's sinful. At least they did back then. Now I think the Boy Scout admits just about anyone who will pay money because they're not doing so well. But this was 20 years ago. It's amazing. Just when I first started teaching, Augusta National still excluded women. I think my second or third year they changed that policy. So even in my short tenure of teaching, things have just changed so radically. Rehnquist. Oh yeah, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I've always wondered why sororities like Alpha Kappa Alpha and Delta Sigma Theta, which are historically women organizations, were kind of almost forced into letting men be a part of it.
I didn't know that.
Or maybe they're not officially a part of it, but I see all the time when you got guys like stepping at HBCUs with the Deltas and AKAs, and I don't know if they're just maybe they're not officially a member.
Anyone else? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
You know, those organizations were meant to promote sisterhood and family, you know, values amongst women, and you know,
I'm pretty sure those are not state laws that mandate that, but maybe they're just friends. I don't know.
Okay.
Nancy,
okay.
do you know anything about this? I'm not sure.
No, I just had a question.
Please go ahead.
So do you think if in this case, if Dale had not been, had not identified as gay, but was still a gay rights activist, whatever, do you think then, because it is speech related, that it's?
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way. If you're in leadership, right? Let's say he's a scout leader, so he's in leadership. When you're in leadership and you go out and speak on your own, those views can be imputed to the Boy Scouts. Right? This is why if you have a job, you generally don't talk to the press, right? Because whatever you say to the press may be as if you're speaking on behalf of the organization. So I think it's a weaker argument, but I think it's still an argument there. You don't look persuaded.
Well, I mean, it's a moot point because now they allow it. It's a hang up for me, but.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, one of the beauties of my job is I don't speak for the school. And that's just assumed that when I go on TV and I say stuff, it's not South Texas. Thank God it's not. Right? Lord help all of you. My views, your views. No, I mean, seriously, like, look, I don't speak for you. I don't speak for the dean. I don't speak for my colleagues. I definitely don't speak for my colleagues, right? I speak for my own self. It's true. But most of you will become law firm attorneys, right? Or maybe you'll become law clerks. You can't go out and speak to the press because people assume, oh, he's speaking on behalf of his judge or he's speaking on behalf of his partner, right? He's an agent, right? Agency, right? He's an agent, if you will. So really, I would say that Dale would have an agency of some sort to speak on behalf of the Boy Scouts. That's why you generally don't let your employees talk to the press. You have a PR department because they can maybe do better. This is why it's so problematic when employees start tweeting and they lose their jobs because they go, oh, how can company X host this employee who's tweeting these awful things? He's tweeting on his own. Doesn't matter. People still lose their jobs over the tweets because you associate the employee with the employer. It comes back to the employer. Huge issue about people being fired for their private tweets from 15 years ago or however many years ago they have them. Twitter's not quite that old, but you get the gist. All right. Whenever you say an old tweet surfaced, it's just this Loch Ness monster descended from the deep. Someone found it. All right. Let me wrap up. Rehnquist says that including Dale would alter the Boy Scouts' ability to advocate their viewpoints. Right? And then Rehnquist says it's not the job of the courts to disagree or reject a group's values. Right? This is to me his point before. Even if a group holds maybe what you might call oppressive, which I think is a very broad word, but let's say negative views, they're still allowed to hold those views, right? We don't say that people with bad views have to change their views by law, right? We don't force them to change it unless they're actually going out and carrying those views into action, which is a very contested point. Okay. As a result, the state's accommodation laws in New Jersey is very broad, and it violates the First Amendment. Perhaps one way this case could be dissolved is saying that Boy Scouts are not a public accommodation, that the New Jersey definition is just too broad, that there should be certain types of activities just exempt altogether. But that's a question for the legislature, I think, not a question for the courts. All right. The dissent by Justice Stevens says it plainly that the court is using the First Amendment to create an exemption to a discrimination law, and that had never been done before, right? You've studied Katzenbeck and McClung in Heart of Atlanta, the civil rights case from the 1960s. There was another case which people don't remember called Piggy Park, which was a grocery store somewhere in the South. I can't remember what it's called, Piggy Park, where a white business owner actually said that his religious belief required segregation of the races, and he needed to keep black people out of his store in order to fulfill his religious beliefs. The Supreme Court didn't decide the case. They basically dismissed it, saying it was basically frivolous, right? They just didn't even talk about it, right? But what Stevens is getting at is you're not supposed to use the First Amendment, whether religion or speech, as a way to challenge discrimination laws. We will return to this subject at great length with the free exercise of religion. Because many of the modern cases are using not speech, but religion as a way to seek an exemption from an otherwise generally applicable anti-discrimination law. All right. Again, if you watched the video from Friday, please email me. I'm happy to mark you excused. If you miss any class, you should watch a video that day or the next day. We only have 2 days between classes, so if you don't watch it and you fall behind, it's really not for your benefit. Of office hours at 2:45. Any other questions? Yeah, Mackenzie, go ahead.
Sorry, I might have missed this part, but what keeps confusing me is that how are private groups considered state actors, like because of the public accommodation?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, the thinking is because the Boy Scouts were considered public accommodation, they are within the state's police power. Right, but keep in mind though, I think I maybe answered your question wrongly. The state action doctrine is only for federal power. Right? When Congress wants to regulate, Congress regulates state action. Congress also uses Section 5 powers, right, the 14th Amendment. But here we're dealing with states. States have a very broad police power, and they don't need to, they can regulate private action just as well as state action. So I answered your question wrong the first time.
That makes sense.
Okay. Anything else? All right, the minute poll's running. Please fill it in. I'll be back for office hours about 20. Oh, no, I did multiple. Yeah, I know, multiple choice. People are putting multiple choice answers. Yeah, today's answer was E, all the above. Everything was just awesome, right? Or terrible, I don't know. Yeah, I should do a poll. A is good, B is bad. Just go vote. All right. Thank you, everyone. I will see you in class on Wednesday.